And welcome back into a Throwback Thursday on One Mic with Big Mike. Got a little NWA coming back there as they will be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm going to start a petition. I got to get that changed so that all music is inclusive in the title. I don't know what it would be called, but maybe just the Music Hall of Fame. You know, so all music, because this is not, you hear this is straight out of Compton. It's not rock and roll music. You know, no shot against rock and roll music, but just doesn't encompass everything. Anyway, it is Thursday. It is One Mic with Big Mike on Spreaker.com and the Spreaker app. It's available for all your mobile devices. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at the number 1 MIC, WITHBIGMIKE, One Mic with Big Mike. I'm also streaming video right now on my Facebook page via YouTube. Find it on my Facebook page. It'll be the top post, facebook.com/ONEMICWITHBIGMIKE. Also, make sure you guys tell your friends about the show. Have them sign up for their free Spreaker account. Once they do that, they can jump on in the live interactive chat room with me and converse with each other. You can talk to me. You can tell me how bad I am or how stupid I am to have that damn Gilbert Arenas conversation. All those things. But speaking of being stupid, we're going to do the opposite of that right now. We started the first half hour of the show with a bunch of stupidity and ignorance. Let's get a little bit smarter now. As I promised you guys, right now on the phone is my guy Steve Silver from thelegalblitz.com. He's going to bring some intelligence to the show. Yeah, y'all give it up for Steve. Yeah. Steve, how you doing, brother?
I'm okay. Well, I'll try to be the professor tonight. No,
man, you're one of the smartest guests that I've had on any show that I've done or produced, and I mean that.
I appreciate it.
No problem, man. Where do we start? Let me ask you something that I didn't ask you the last time we talked. Are you a fan of any particular team or sport?
Well, I mean, I grew up in Pittsburgh, so, Steelers come first.
Okay.
And then this year I've had tremendous success. Both my alma maters, Temple and Northwestern, great football teams. Both going to bowl games, and it's been a fun year. But I love football, but hockey's probably number one too. I covered hockey and spent a couple years covering hockey out in Vegas for the Las Vegas Sun before becoming a lawyer. So those are my two top sports.
All right. You know what? I noticed today when I was putting together the show and all the visual aspects for the show, I saw your picture and I was like, and I've been recently trying to binge this show called The Grinder. Have you seen that?
I have not.
It's a show about lawyers with Rob Lowe and Fred Savage. And I was like, damn, this dude looks like Fred Savage off that show, The Grinder. And if you're wondering what I'm saying, you guys can check out. I have a picture of Steve Silver from thelegalblitz.com up right now on the Facebook page, on the live stream. You'll see me in live action, but you'll see a still photo of him right now. All right, to the business. Let's go up north or to the Midwest. Let's go to Missouri. And this crazy law that they tried to pass, I found out right before the show started. I read an article that said they actually withdrew the law that, in my opinion, was serving as some sort of retaliation for what happened a few months ago on the campus where the football players threatened not to play a game that Saturday versus BYU because the president of the university at the time was ignoring some of the racial matters that went on there. And then once the football team got involved, he ended up, bowing down to their request and resigning. Now, Rick Bratton and Kurt Barr, two politicians from Missouri, wanted to pass a law that says if you're in that position as a student athlete, that term, that ridiculous term, student athlete, and you decide that you're not going to play a sport based on some belief that you may have or some protest or something of that nature, your scholarship will be revoked. Now, when you heard about this, as a legal mind and as an attorney, what was your initial reaction?
I remember when I first saw it on Twitter, actually, that morning. One of my good friends from college and the other reporter that I covered Northwestern football with when I was in college is David Morrison, and he is the beat reporter now for Missouri football at the Columbia newspaper. And so, I keep track of everything he's doing, and his status popped up. This bill has been pre-filed and I couldn't believe it. I didn't know anything about this Rick Bratton, and apparently he has a history of some misguided legislation, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
But, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, sometimes you see links or pictures online, and I just figured maybe it's a hoax or something. And then I started seeing more news outlets reporting, and I thought, I got to get to the bottom of this and, get something up, and ended up writing, a story that was picked up on Deadspin and has attracted a lot of attention, and really some divisive attention, people on both sides of it. And, I think there's a lot of issues we can talk about. And number one was certainly, it's called the First Amendment.
Wait, so people were actually on this dude's side?
People, I'm shocked every time I write about the NCAA or student athletes or payment. I've been very active. I've been down in South Carolina testifying on behalf of a bill to create trust funds, postgraduate trust funds for student athletes. And on this story, people thought, well, it's their job. They should, if they don't play, they shouldn't get their scholarship, which is the whole point.
Right.
Right.
Oh,
so the
really?
the people who are saying, well, if I don't show up for work, I don't get paid. Well, that's the whole point. They're not getting paid. And to view scholarship as a form of payment might be legitimate, but then we got to talk about changing the whole system. There's plenty of college students on scholarships right now that if they skip their, 10 o'clock literature class tomorrow, their scholarship's not being revoked.
Right. So
this is just absurd.
Would it be fair for me to, I've coined a term, I need to call the people who copyright things, the Trump effect. This whole thing that's going on now where people just ignore facts, they ignore common sense, they ignore the Constitution and say, you know what, this is what I want. Politicians, I mean, so this is what's going to happen. The fact that he's talking about these kids receiving state money, when in fact they do not. None of the kids on that campus receive state money for athletic scholarships. It's written in the handbook. Am I correct in giving this type of behavior that moniker, the Trump effect?
Well, I think this is just the we could call the older white guy effect, which is just I want to watch my football and I don't want to hear about politics or these kids wanting money or even having rights, because you come here to play football and that's what I want you to do.
He actually said that.
Step out of line. When it step out of line, it makes me feel uncomfortable. So I better do something, to keep these kids in line. And let's be honest, the other co-sponsor of the bill, he came out and he admitted this is in direct response to the strike
Kurt
that
Barr.
happened back in October. Yes, he said that. I mean, so there's no guessing about it. This is what the bill intended to do. And what's behind that bill, as I wrote about, is you're looking at a state that's had a lot of racial tension, a lot of issues in the past year, that has a pretty divisive, I guess, political scene from what I'm learning. And you've got a bill that says, hey, we've got a football team, and there's a lot of kids who look a little different than us on that football team, and we want to control them. And that's really what this was intended to do.
Now, you kind of alluded to it earlier about people considering, or those people considering this a job. Rick, what's his name? Rick Bratton. He actually, in a comment, said, "You're here to play football." What do you think the higher ups at the NCAA were thinking when all this was going down? Because that's pretty much the crux of their whole amateurism scam. The fact that no, they're here to get an education. They just happen to play football. What were those people thinking?
Well, that's what's so amazing about all, from the original strike, several months ago, to this bill, which is this is exactly what the NCAA fears. The more and more that it gets into the public, consciousness that this is really a job, and the scholarship is a form of payment. And this is what these kids are on campus to do, play football. I mean, that just cracks the whole foundation. The whole thing is predicated on they're just students. They happen to play football, but they're just like everybody else.
Right.
Now, we all know that's a lie. I mean, it's just not true anymore. But that's what's so fascinating, because when they first said they were going to strike, what could the school do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they did revoke scholarships, then they'd be admitting that if you don't come to work, you're not getting paid.
Right.
And that just undermines their whole argument.
He's Steve Silver of thelegalblitz.com. Make sure you guys follow him, as I do, on Twitter and Facebook at The Legal Blitz. Before I move on to my fantasy football topic, you made mention to some things a few seconds ago, and I want to ask you, this Dabo Swinney thing, where he gave pizza to like 20-something thousand students because they made it to they finished number one in the rankings. Could his players have partaken in that pizza without there being an NCAA violation?
Well, let's say this. Coach Swinney probably bought all that pizza because by his football players doing so well,
mm-hmm.
he's gotten more than $1 million in bonuses this year.
And he's one of the big proponents about not paying players as well.
Right. And for anyone that follows me on Twitter, you know that at least once a week I tweet something negative about him. He's my number one target.
Good for you.
This is a guy who promised to quit if any money is given to athletes,
right?
To the college athletes. That's so insane for a guy who earns several million a year plus bonuses, which he's, credit to the team for going undefeated, but every win he's getting more money in his pocket. So he could have bought some of these kids new cars, let alone pizzas.
Ridiculous.
And wouldn't have felt it. But you raise an interesting point, as we've seen in recent history of a coach buying a kid a bagel, or lunch. It can be a violation,
mm-hmm.
and you really have to get these things approved in advance, and there's some calculation as to what the value of the free stuffing, what would be the value of the pizza, and really the rules have changed somewhat since, if you remember, when UConn basketball was in the championship,
mm-hmm.
and their star player says he's going to bed hungry at night. So the NCAA has tried to avoid having that happen again. It has restricted some of this, but certainly, I guarantee you, someone in that athletic department had to go check the compliance codes to make sure it was okay.
Now, did you hear about what Oliver Luck had to say, Andrew Luck's dad had to say the other day about his opinion on why coaches are paid and the players aren't? Basically because coaches are adults and these athletes aren't. Doesn't that kind of give you a photograph, a snapshot of the mindset of the people who run this crooked organization? Like, they don't even look at these 18, 19, 20-year-old young men as men.
Of course not. Listen, they can be drafted and go serve in the military and go fight for us, but give them any sort of rights
right.
Or
Anything.
compensate them. Or compensate them for the fact that they're putting their health on the line day in and day out. Really their future long-term health, with no promise of insurance, in the future, no promise like an employee would have workers' compensation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a one-sided system, and it's a system in which the one side keeps getting their pockets filled bigger and bigger.
Right. And
no one wants to give up a piece of that pie. But I think that it's coming. The NCAA, they scored a little bit of a victory in the O'Bannon case, but it was a mixed victory, and I think that's going to pave the way for some more court challenges in the next, let's say, 5 years, and we're going to see a big change.
One last NCAA question about the hypocrisy that does live within. I want to get your opinion on the Leonard Fournette jersey and cleats, how at first he wouldn't be allowed to auction them, and then because of the public outcry, they then caved and let him auction his gear for the relief efforts that were going on in South Carolina with the floods. What's your take on that?
Well, that is just the MO for the NCAA, right? They will do anything and try anything until there's a public outcry. I mean, they'll allow coaches to, break contracts and leave for other schools overnight, but a student tries to transfer for a legitimate reason, and they'll prevent it. A student tries to sell a jersey for money. Oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, but then it comes out, no, it's for charity, and they look bad, so then they reverse themselves. This happens. This happens almost weekly.
Should they have?
What?
Should they have allowed him to do it?
It certainly opens up the door for more of this to happen.
Exactly.
For, other athletes, and that, that could create problems down the road in terms of, is it a legitimate charity and organization it's going to? Who's overseeing the money? Is anybody making money off of it? Right? Is an auction house getting an administrative fee? There's all these little things that I think you have to be careful of. But in terms of the decision-making process, as is playing out right now in court over the USC, Southern Cal violations, the NCAA, it just ignores the law and sometimes the facts right in front of them to make decisions that fit their philosophy. And consequences be damned. They're going to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. He's Steve Silver of thelegalblitz.com joining me right now. I got a couple more minutes with him. Make sure you guys are following him at The Legal Blitz on Twitter and on Facebook. Moving on real quick here. Are you a fantasy football guy? You got a couple fantasy teams you're working on right now, playoff time? You one of those guys?
I do. I won the regular season and then lost in the first round of the playoffs.
Bees like that. Because you know why? You don't have the skill.
It's killing me.
You don't have the skill. It's not a game of chance. It's a game of skill, is it not?
Well, and the big difference is it's season long versus daily fantasy, and where do we draw that line?
Right.
This is one of the most interesting topics in the past several years, I think.
What's the next step for those guys, FanDuel and DraftKings? I know they have been now, I guess, re-allowed to do business in the state of New York as they were the Attorney General. He told them they couldn't do it, but then they appealed, and now they're waiting on another court date. What is the next step for them, and how does that whole thing transpire? How do you see it transpiring?
Well, I think what's going to happen, and just so we're clear, it was, the Attorney General wanted to shut them down. Both sides filed, motions to prevent the other from, doing so, and a judge actually ruled that FanDuel and DraftKings is illegal gambling. That was a court ruling at the lowest level, which in New York is called the Supreme Court, but it's the entry-level court. That ruling came down, and then a stay was issued pending an appeal. So it just basically set the status quo. It has not overturned that decision. That is a decision, and it will be determined by an appeals court. But right now, if I had to bet, both DraftKings and FanDuel are working overtime, with their lobbyists and their investors, all their big influence, to get laws passed, to basically legalize and regulate them so that they don't have to, pin all their hopes on some appeals court. I'm guessing that's exactly what's happening in Albany right now.
Why wouldn't they have done that preemptively? Like, why would they wait until something actually happened to decide to do that?
I ask myself this a lot, which is, these companies are paying gigantic law firms millions of dollars to really give them bad advice. I always think, well, why isn't my phone ringing from one of these big boys in New York? But, what they did was I think it was arrogance, which is we found a little opening in a 2006 federal law that allows us to do what we're going to do, or at least we think it does. And we're going to exploit that, and we're going to hit you over the head,
right,
with a commercial every 2 seconds.
Right.
And we don't need to deal with the states. we can get by. And they should have seen it coming. They should have worked to basically craft friendly legislation and get it passed state by state to avoid the mess they're in now, which is New York is just test case. California is looking into them. Georgia is looking into them.
Didn't Philadelphia
Florida,
just pass something as well? Pennsylvania, yeah. Didn't they just pass something as well?
Yeah. Well, there has not been a court ruling, but the attorney generals are all investigating these sites. The Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're looking into them. So you've got all these hands sort of in the pot saying, well, it looks like gambling and it smells like gambling, is it? And you have a state like Massachusetts who says, well, we're just going to go ahead, legalize it and regulate it, and tax it. And I think that's the path that the companies now, they have to go to.
Mm-hmm.
In order to survive, they have to adjust to some regulations and, welcome some additional taxes.
Amazing how that works. We got a couple more minutes here with Steve Silver of thelegalblitz.com. He is the founder of thelegalblitz.com. Also, make sure you guys are following him on Facebook and on Twitter at thelegalblitz. Are you going to go check out that concussion movie on Christmas or?
Oh, I definitely am. And it was filmed in Pittsburgh, my hometown. I assume it's going to make me feel even worse about myself when I watch football there.
Dude, some of these ex-players called it a horror movie to them. They had a screening here in Atlanta, and the NFLPA set it up for Peter King's site, the Monday Morning Quarterback, to have some former players go check it out. They walked out of that movie screening saying this was more of a horror movie for us. Like, guys were in there gasping and crying. Yeah, man, it's real.
I don't doubt it, and I've suspected that this movie will hint at what the public would have learned about had the NFL not settled the concussion lawsuit.
Right.
That settlement, which is $700+ million, even though it's a drop in the bucket for what their exposure could have been, it's still a lot of money. And they settled that case because there would have been depositions and discovery and all kinds of documents made public about how much the NFL knew and how they actively tried to cover up,
right,
evidence of the long-term effects of repeated concussion. And I think that movie, I almost lost my mind. I don't know if you saw on ESPN, but Adam Schefter said, people shouldn't go watch the concussion movie.
because knowledge
that
is
all
power.
The information's, all the information's already out there. It was on, the PBS, Frontline series, and they don't need to go see a dramatization. Well, no, they do. Because, it's a form of storytelling that's powerful and it gets it in people's minds. And this is a very real problem. This is one of the most powerful corporations in America. And this is how they treated people.
And most people are too lazy to read.
To it.
Yeah, most people are just too lazy to read. So movies may be the best vehicle to get it across to the average person. I've been reading about this for a very long time. I've had Dr. Sanjay Gupta on the show before. We've talked about the concussion stuff. And I want to ask you something as a lawyer, something that I think a lot of people are glazing over. Like, so many people are talking about with this issue, small kids and Pop Warner. And the issue's even been raised in about college kids because now Northwestern tried to unionize, and there's this thing happened in Missouri, and people are saying, oh, my God, these college kids, they're starting to realize their power. But I feel like the part of the equation that's being forgotten is high school, because in many high school districts, they can't handle lawsuits. A college can handle a lawsuit. Even Pop Warner, because of the money that they bring in, can handle a lawsuit. But I'm of the opinion that if some mom goes and sues, I was reading this article about this kid named Zach Langston that blew his head off, and his mom is attributing that to head injuries from playing high school football. And I'm seeing high schools shut down their football program. If a mom decided, I want to sue this school district for $100 million, or the school, they could shut down a whole school district of sports. Am I wrong in thinking that?
So you're not wrong in thinking it, and that's been, there have been lawsuits filed. I know Illinois was involved in some, and then the state of Washington, I've written in the past, it's called the Zachary Lightstep law, which ended up being passed over there. And, what you're seeing is, yes, the insurance premiums just aren't going to, cover it. Schools can't afford, policies in terms of what one lawsuit victory could do. The problem is proving that the concussions and whatever the disease would be, or if it's CTE, which can only be diagnosed after someone's dead,
Absolutely.
That it came from that high school. It didn't come from playing in the backyard with your friends. It didn't come from the youth league before you got to high school.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of proof issues that are difficult when you're talking about a lawsuit like that. But the liability, yes, it's enormous. And it's one victory away from shutting down the system. It really is. And I know that the schools and the different athletic associations at the high school level have been trying to be proactive about it. They put more doctors on the sidelines, make sure there's a clearance program. But there's only so much you can do. I mean, I really do think as the science evolves into being able to diagnose brain trauma better, that these schools are facing a ticking time bomb.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Steve Silver. TheLegalBlitz.com is his website. He's also on Twitter and Facebook at The Legal Blitz. As always, Steve, I got smarter today, man. I hope everyone else did as well. And thank you for spending some time with me this evening. Thank you again, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.